some of the common things that in your career seeing people get rejected for the visa as a designated visa officer, and how do some general advice that Bangladeshi students should follow for when they go into interviews, when they prepare their documents. I think you're the best to kind of like highlight these points.
So like we kind of have been discussing, I think the whole major topic of our discussion is really prepare, understand, and know your timeline. And it's all about paperwork. So when it comes to the F1 visa, I strongly believe that if you are organized and you stay on top of all of your paperwork and you have evidence to basically support everything you're saying, that's a no-brainer. There should be no red flags. There should be no issues in you getting the visa. But one of the biggest challenges that I am facing is there's a very huge gap between, okay, I got into a university and I somehow have gotten my I-20, and there's a huge gap in between students understanding that the I-20 should reflect your DS-160 form. So the DS-160 form is basically your visa appointment form, right? So that DS-160 form is a huge form that you fill out before you attend your visa interview. I am finding a lot of students are completely not connecting the I-20. So all the information that's on the I-20 is not matching the information on the DS-160. So that right away is a red flag for a visa officer. So if they see information that is different in the CVIS system, the CVIS system is the school system on them issuing you the I-20. If they see a big discrepancy between the CVIS system and they see a big discrepancy between their system, so all of the paperwork that you submitted, then that's a big red flag. So that is a denial. So that would be, it really depends on the VO, how the visa officer, how they would reject it. They could be very kind and simply reject it and say, you need to submit the correct paperwork, or they can deny you based on fraud. So I personally am finding a lot of problematic cases with Bangladeshis submitting fraudulent paperwork to the US government. And to be quite frank, the US government uses data mining. Data mining is essentially information that they can get on you based on the web. And they're able to find out whether or not you're lying. So I always recommend, even if it's difficult, you should certainly always be honest in your paperwork, because there are a few rejections that we can help with. Like, for example, the one I just gave you. So incorrect paperwork, you can definitely resubmit. And we can help you with that. If you ever got a visa rejection and you need support with that, that's pretty much our specialty. But there are some rejections that we cannot help with. Some of those include some security concerns. So if you have a security concern, which could be related to, just your profession, your area of interest, if there's basically some security questions that you answer in the DS-160 form. There's about 25 security questions that you answer. If you have answered yes for any of those questions and you still want to attend and study in the US, I would recommend that you give us a call, because sometimes we would need to consult with an immigration lawyer to kind of figure out how we can get you to the next steps. But the security concerns is also a big reason for denial. And people don't know that unless, you take a look at the denial paper and you actually follow up. So again, they should be giving you a paper if you get a denial. A denial doesn't necessarily mean, okay, that's completely, I'm not going to get the visa anymore. There are certain denials that we can help with. Like I mentioned earlier, the incorrect paperwork is a big one. Sometimes the other thing that visa officers are looking for is your financials. So your financials have to be absolutely sound. Your financials have to make sense. Everyone, it's really funny because, everyone has an uncle who's going to be supporting them through their education, but, you have to have evidence to back that up. You have to have bank statements for at least 6 months before you apply. So whenever we sit with a student, or whenever I sit with a student, the first thing I say is, okay, what schools do you want to apply to? What are you interested in? And also, do you have money set aside in the bank? Because that is something that they will be looking. And if you guys do have funding, whether it's from family, whether it's from friends, I do recommend to put that money aside almost right away. Allocate it for your education and put it to the side. And, a lot of our students don't have funding, and they are looking for fully funded programs. And that's fine, as long as you apply on time, and we can support you in getting scholarships. We can help you find funding. I think the on time part is really important. A lot of Bangladeshis are very flexible with their timing, but
Yeah.
I think, in the US, a deadline is a deadline. And especially with international students, that deadline is actually like, that's like the absolute last day you can submit it.
Ironclad. It's ironclad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
On that point, right? Like, guys, don't lie about obvious things. Like, you got your visa rejected once. Don't say, oh yeah, I never ran for it. Like, they know you ran for the visa. Like, okay, you know what I mean? Oh, like, do you have a wife? Yes, I have a wife. Don't say, oh, I don't have a wife. Like, oh, like, what's, because it's like, don't freak out and say these like weird things about, and there's too many misinformation about visa, right? Like, oh, don't say this, that means you can't come back here anymore. Like, there's a couple of just misnomers, like, oh, don't essentially always use your, I mean, it's, some of them are good, like one of them I heard, always use your parents as a sponsor. But look, if your parents don't have enough sponsorship and you have an uncle that can sponsor you, has liquid funds that they can show, right? Then go with your uncle. Don't go cut corners and try to make things work for your parents here. It's like,
yeah. I mean, I think you bring up a great point, which is just the misinformation, like, the lying about whether or not you have family, the lie, the
that's a
lying.
good one. Let's talk about that one for a second. If you have family in the United States, they're like, oh, don't say you have family in the United States. No, like, I mean, they will know if you have a name matching, right? Like you said, they have data mining here. Let's say your dad's in the United States, right? Like, you be like, hey, yeah, he's there, but I have tie. Like, it's tricky, right? There's tricky situations, so you don't want to go in and lie, right? Like, that is that's just fraud. Like, you can't run for the visa again anymore, right? So anyway, continue. I think you see anything else that's like,
yeah. I mean, I really love the part that you brought up about family, because I think there's two concerns with family, right? So let's just say a recently married student decides they want to bring their spouse. A lot of agencies in Bangladesh are basically saying, do not mention your spouse. Don't bring it up. It's a bad idea. But personally, my personal advice is, if you can support your spouse financially, because remember, when you're going to study in the US with your F1 visa, you are really not allowed to work anywhere except for on campus, dedicated hours on campus. So a lot of students, they decide, oh, I'm not going to show my spouse, or I'm not going to show my children or my family members because it's going to be problematic for me. In a way, yes, but you should be completely honest. You should be honest that you do have family, but they're not pursuing the F2 visa. So the F1 visa is for the students. The F2 visa is for any dependents that decide to go with the students. So that's one big concern, right? The family back home in Bangladesh that you may or may not want to bring to the US. The second concern, like you brought up, is any relatives in the US. The reason why they bring that up is because they want to see strong ties, right? And what I always tell students is, if you do have it, just say, yeah, I have a few distant relatives who are currently living in the US, but my decision to study in the US is basically completely related just to my educational and career goals. Like, be very honest. I do have family, but I have the money, I have the expenses, I can support myself, and this is what I want to do for my career. This is the best next step for my career. So definitely mention the family, be honest about it, but focus on your career, focus on the fact that you have the money to support yourself and to pay for your education.
People have to understand what the intent of F1 visa is. This is not a visa for you to go in the United States and work and get settled. That's what everybody wants, but that is not the intent of that visa. The visa intent is you go there, you study, and you come back to Bangladesh. You get the necessary work experience that you want. Okay, you come back to Bangladesh. Fine, you can get there's ways you can do the H1B, get sponsorship if you're a very talented student and a skilled worker, right? But I just want to, the ethos behind F1 visa. F1 visa is that you go study and you have strong ties to Bangladesh and you come back. I think, I had people get super discouraged, right? Like once they get rejected for their visa. But I think don't, you can apply multiple times. Like if you got accepted, you can defer your admission, and if you have some paperwork, if it's not fraud, right? If it's not fraud, we can go over and over again and try to get you prepared for that visa.